People can get so touchy about genre that I actually feel a little bit nervous broaching the subject. But I already kind of did, so I figure we might as well go a little bit further along this path. But the first thing I'm going to say is that I don't know the best way to handle this issue. And I truly am interested in hearing how all of you deal with this. Get your syrup ready, because this video is going to be full of waffling. So I discussed genre quite a bit in my video about writing what makes you happy. Sometimes I think phrased it as write in the genre that makes you happy, though not always. In the comments, Stebigun left a really thoughtful point that kind of spurred me to think about things a little deeper and make this video. I would advise you, if you write by the seat of your pants, to try to ignore the thought, I am writing horror, I am writing this or that. Allow yourself to write your style, your iconic theme, without trying to label it as a genre. What I mean is that I believe you can write any genre as long as you stay true to your style. I think there is a lot to be said about this point of view, and like I said, it really did get me thinking. I definitely think that you should, all of us should, at least some of the time, just write without preconceived notions about the restrictions and see what comes out. It'll almost certainly tell you a lot about yourself as a storyteller to just write and let whatever is inside you out onto the page. Now, what's interesting me about a creator, it's not only in writing, I also enjoy this in music and probably other things, is that I enjoy restrictions. I don't come up with ideas out of nothing. I take ideas and I mash them up and see how they work together, see how I can make them work together. It almost becomes like a logic puzzle. I've said before that I'm much more of a logical writer than someone who takes flights of fancy. Like, for example, I actually really enjoy the very rigid structure required by screenplays, at least if you hope to get them made into movies, because people reading those screenplays will literally calculate where the beats should fall given the page count and turn to see if they find those beats on that page. For me, that actually takes care of a lot of stuff that I am not necessarily interested in, and it gives me like a scaffolding where I can start logically hanging things, kind of removing a lot of choices that would weigh on me while not bringing a lot. So I like prompts, I like plot seeds, I like meta goals. These are things that interest me, and a lot of times my writing does start from this. But I am a person who writes often between genres. Usually the things that I write that are full of the most horror kind of tropes, the most obvious monsters, are really the least horror. Burden, Kansas, for example, is about really gruesome vampires, and yet it's far more of a Western than it is a horror story, or at least equally so. Beyond that, it's the exploration of an idea of what is left of a man when he feels like a monster for what he's done and is clinging to the last threads of his humanity. But then I'll write something where on the surface, everything seems normal, and that's where you'll find the most gut-wrenching horror and anxiety in my work. So, when I go into something thinking I'm going to write horror, a lot of times that is actually very fun and interesting for me. I find playing with tropes really interesting. Why do we have certain traditions? Why do those traditions work? How can we deconstruct them? Like, do they even actually work? Or did they work at one point and they're now just vestigial Can we do a nod to them and do them better? Can we use them for different reasons? Can we use them to lull an audience into a false sense of security and then spring a horrible trap on them? Some writers are really only into the story, but I do very strongly have these meta interests that I play with when I'm writing. And really, when I get comments from writers about my writing, this is usually the aspect that people talk about. With Bird in Kansas, when it first came out, a lot of writers were talking about how minimalist the voice was, which is extremely different from my natural writing voice, which tends to be very maximalist on a sentence level. And what was done with the minimalist voice, how it added to the feeling of the Western, how it added to the starkness of the horror. But that brings up one of my biggest issues with this sort of experimentation, and which leads me to try to offer some advice, is that you'll notice that I said that that's what writers talked to me about. Most of your audience is not going to be other writers, even though most of the people who you speak to and take advice from are going to be writers. Many of the most voracious readers in any genre, other than maybe what I would call mimetic and what is commonly called literary, want to know exactly what they're getting. Fiction is their mindless entertainment. And realize that I am not saying that with judgment, even though I am a fiction writer who cares about fiction as much as anything. For me, even before I started writing, I wanted new, different, challenging. I wanted to read things that would just punch a hole into my chest and rip my heart out. I wanted to be blown away. If I start a book and I don't feel like it's doing anything interesting, I'm very likely to quit it, even if maybe it could be considered entertaining. But I also literally play Doom 2 almost every single day. That is my mindless entertainment. There are people who are extremely invested in video games, who play all of the most interesting, thought-provoking, mind-blowing, wide-ranging video games that they can find, and who would see what I just admitted to as an insult to their beloved medium. But you have to do something in the course of your day to just decompress and unwind and let your mind cool down. For me, that's Doom 2. For other people, that might be novels. And so you can write something outside of the box, but you either need to label it as such, write in a genre where the reader wants experimentation, or expect bad reviews. I'm not the most knowledgeable on this, so I could be corrected in the comments, but my understanding is that if you write a romance novel, you had better have either a happily ever after or at least a happy for now ending. Most of the novels that I write have a relationship at their core. Some of them are new relationships that are developing, and it could be considered a romance, except the protagonist ends up dead at the end. I label them as horror, but I say all that when the thing that really brought this video up, besides that really good comment, is that the most important thing is that you enjoy the writing process and finish your novel, and then go on to write the next. The only hope that you're going to keep doing that is to enjoy the creation process. And so I have to look a little bit deeper. I said in that video to write what you want, but I think that maybe we need to look at how to write what you want and still reach your other goals. So my first idea is the farthest to one end of the spectrum. And that would be to write what you want and then revise it into what you want. And at the end of the process, see where it fits best and put it there. This would be the purest path, the one with the most artistic integrity. It's probably also the most difficult to find your audience, unless what naturally emerges, of course, naturally fits into a genre, and so does your next book and your next, hopefully into closely related genres. Now, I would say, while I kind of laughed while I said that, don't discount the possibility of that. None of us are starting as blank slates. We have all absorbed a huge amount of structure and tropes that practically live as that scaffolding inside of our brains without us even knowing it from the media that we've consumed. It's quite possible that you will be able to write exactly what you want, and it will turn out to be a great representation of some existing genre. But let's say that it didn't end up that way. And let's go to my thought number 2, which is to write what you want and then revise with the door like wide open. I tend to write for myself as an ideal reader, but the horror genre is one that allows for more experimentation. Like I said, you can get away with a lot in a genre where the readers expect and enjoy experimentation, but you could instead find that you've let your heart run wild in the initial creation and come up with something that doesn't fit too neatly. And if you want to, you could reel in the parts that don't fit within the genre that you've decided to target and kind of kill them the same way that you would kill the cleverest of your phrases that are jarring to a reader because they don't belong in the world of your story, even though you love them as a writer. Even if you've gotten to a point where you are killing your darlings before they even make it out your fingers and onto the page, it's something that we all have to do, and that I don't think that we judge ourselves for not having integrity for doing it. I think a lot of times, for me, I find that the parts that I am interested in aren't things that cause it to not fit somewhere. I may need to punch up the action. I may need to add some more plot points that are exciting. That isn't necessarily what comes naturally to me, and it's not necessarily what I'm interested in, but I think it's fine to do that for the reader, especially if it doesn't disturb the stuff that you are interested in. But my third thought of how to find this balance of how to write within a genre and have fun with it instead of feeling constrained by it is to take it and make it literary. So now I'm going to have to actually define what I mean by literary, which I think I've danced around in several previous videos. For some reason, the world at large often thinks that literary means realistic. Now, I do think that this is changing. Definitely in the past decade, I've been seeing that. Because here's the thing. The realistic fiction is also fantasy. It's all made up. When you hand it to any given person, they're going to say, well, that's not realistic. But also, if you took a transcription of real events, a real conversation, real things that happen in the world, and told somebody it was fiction, they'd say, well, this isn't realistic. What I call it is mimetic fiction, fiction that tries to mimic the real world. That has nothing to do with whether or not it's literary. Literary fiction focuses on being more than entertainment. Now, what exactly that means varies from book to book, writer to writer. It means that along with the story, the writer is playing with language, is getting deep into characters, is doing interesting things with themes. So my novel, The Horde, which no, I still have not published again, even though it was the subject featured in my self-publishing series of videos, but it is going to come out soon, is about zombie-like creatures and garbage dumps and hoarders' houses. It's a genuinely disturbing horror novel. I have received many reviews or comments said directly to me that the book made the person's skin literally itch. But it is also about how anxiety can control your mind and your perception of the world. It's about loss and guilt that you carry for life because you're the only one who can absolve yourself of it and you don't think that you deserve it. It's about being in the sandwich generation, being torn between trying to raise your children and help your aging parents. Now, that doesn't mean that there is a literary publisher trying to put out this book. Even if you make your book literary, it may still fall best under a genre publisher. Small genre presses are much easier to approach, and self-publishing is always a viable option, especially for genre fiction, which is something that I'm going to touch on later in this video. So what this approach does is it gives you something to sink your teeth into while doing the relatively easy work of giving the person reading for entertainment something that will satisfy that. Some of them won't even notice the extra things that you did that were really your focus, and they'll just go on to reading their next book in the same genre. But others definitely will finish your book and they will feel what you put into it, and you could become their new favorite author. So yeah, the world has definitely changed from when I was coming up, judging from all of the high profile, speculative, tinged, but, respected literary novels that have been coming out. At one point, I wanted to teach creative writing at the college level. And so I submitted my horror work to horror publishers, and I submitted my mimetic work to literary journals. From that, hoping to get the publications that I could put on my CV to apply for professor positions. But I had this one really good zombie story that I thought was so moving that it could be one of those CV publications. So I sent it to the best literary journals. This was when you were just first starting to be able to do electronic submissions, which was well into my writing career. And I saw it making it past the first readers on a regular basis and then get rejected. But then I got one back with a personal note, and it was from the Missouri Review. And the note said, "We probably won't ever publish a zombie story, but if we did, it would be one like this." A publication of that quality on my CV could have made my career teaching at some small, maybe a community college. But at the time, everyone was too close-minded about what a literary story looked like. And I had success elsewhere and got tired of waiting for someone to lift me up. And so I just never ended up looking back. I do think that things are less like that now. I mean, you can tell me, though. There is definitely a place for work that defies description, which I know isn't what this necessarily about. We were talking more about writing what you want and finding out where it fits in. But this is, let's say that you write something that just defies description, that you have to call it literary because it just does not match up with any genre's conditions. There is a place for it, but you as an individual are going to have a much harder time finding your audience, finding that place. When you self-publish, initial interest in your work is typically from readers within your genre. You will market to them through the book cover and the description. You will probably communicate to people in genre-specific groups on Goodreads and on Facebook. Without these well-trodden paths, I would consider trying longer to find a traditional publisher. Besides being able to market your book better, the publisher is a trusted voice that says, this novel isn't clear-cut, but it is worth giving a shot. It is an institution trusted by the reader that makes up for them not being able to easily define your book. If you're going to be trying to submit to traditional publishers for longer, then this is my advice. I would say do more networking, go to writers' conferences that are put on by MFA programs, go to the AWP, the Association of Writers and Writing Programs, where you can talk to all the small press and especially the university presses. Every one of those weekends, they have one day where for a cheap ticket price, you can go and just walk the floors with all the booths and talk to all of those people, see what they're putting out, and try to make connections. Trying to get traditionally published can be so brutal. In my last video, I talked about the dominoes of geometric success, which I promise you makes sense in the context of that video and the way that I experienced it. And what I mentioned was that from like a 10,000 foot view, it looks like my career has followed, like the domino can topple a domino 50% bigger, and it can get really, it's geometric success. But what I also mentioned is that the gap between each of those dominoes, when you are in it, can very easily look like failure. The gap between the domino of writing my first novel and self-publishing that novel was almost a decade of constant rejection. And I know that some of you are going to be sitting there thinking a decade of constant rejection, that's nothing. I've been facing 2 or 3 decades. And the sickening part is that I self-published to almost immediate success, and that next domino toppled, and I got the publisher's attention by doing that. So all of those publishers who had rejected me were wrong. But when you write something where it is harder to take that self-publishing path, you might have to hang with that longer. Or, and I guess this is the fourth option, just forget about any sort of external success, which you should be doing regardless as much as possible. Enjoy the writing, enjoy communicating with your peers, with other writers. If you get some readers, enjoy communicating with them as that slowly builds up, and be ready when the world catches up to you. But otherwise, don't think about it. I guess you could just keep your novels on your hard drive and a backup hard drive and on the cloud. You can self-publish them and just not expect a lot of reaction. But either way, one route to go is to just not even think about that, not worry about it, because really worrying about it doesn't do much good. The key thing is that you have to make sure, first and foremost, that you are enjoying the process of writing. Whether or not you can stick to the confines of a genre, or you have to manipulate things such that you can fit your book in one of them, or if you need to write things that can't be categorized at all. So yes, this is me banging that same old drum. Writing is a war of attrition. You have to outlast to improve to the point where you stand alone, or you become disillusioned and you fall off and you watch other writers stick it out and make it, and think about what you could have done if you had just kept putting in your 500 words a day. Most genres, I think that just like the commenter said, I could do it in my style, explore the things that I'm interested in, and have fun with it. And as long as I'm willing to become educated in that genre, at the same time, produce something that has some level of appeal. But there are genres, and don't ask me what they are, that I despise the basic broad strokes of to such a degree that what I produced would either turn into the most spiteful, mean-spirited parody, or I would manage to write it in a straightforward manner while holding in my gorge and be miserable. In which case, I should definitely be miserable doing something more profitable with a higher return on investment. Okay, so that's my waffling and non-advice. Let me know two things. One, how did you decide on your genre? Are you completely happy sticking close to the expectations of it, or do you need to find other ways to make it fun for yourself? And two, what is the medium that you chew cud with? So I'm very hard on novels. I expect big returns on my attention. I'm very hard on TV shows because of the dedication involved, but I'm much less so with movies because those are so easy to consume. I like good movies, but as long as I'm entertained and distracted, I'll sit through one. And if it's horror, all I hope for is competency. And I'm so often disappointed in that. Now, with video games, I just play Doom 2, which is the best game ever made, so I mean, I've hit the pinnacle. But what is it for you that you just consume when it's time to turn your brain off and rest for the day? All right, so that's it from me, J. Allen Riker, just reminding you to write, read, and live.